Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 195. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed author of Wild Worlds, Mitch Larkins.
Hey.
Mitch, how you doing?
Pretty good. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. Yeah. So, before we went on the air, we were just talking about the genre that you work with, which is called LitRPG. Is that how you pronounce it? Is that?
Yes, sir.
Before we talk about Wild Worlds and LitRPG, tell us a little bit about how you kind of got into writing.
So, I've always been big into writing and art and stuff. And I grew up in a small town with one traffic light, so not many people were readers there. So I didn't have many friends that would explore that kind of passion with me until a little bit older. But I actually published a fantasy book like when I was 20, basically
Really?
on a dare. Yeah, my granddad was like, "Oh, you'll never become a published author." I was like, "Oh, well, now it's a challenge." So I managed to get one published. Obviously, it didn't sell very well. Because I had no clue what I was doing because I was 20. So I did publish one years ago, and I just dropped it for a while. And then there was
was that the Untold Tales of Exodia?
Yes, yeah, man, you did do your research, goodness. So yeah, I published that, and it was fun. And I just was like, okay, well, I've done that, so let me just drop writing because nobody's going to ever read this stuff. And then during my various misadventures, I came across a Facebook page called Author's Tale, and they were doing a charity event, kind of like how Perspectives was. I was like, let me see if I can still write. If anybody will read this stuff. So I just threw something together, and they actually, they voted on it, and they picked that as one of the stories. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I should come back to this. And I played around with a few stories, and then eventually that spawned, I got a couple of failed manuscripts I never finished. And then Isekai, anime, manga, and light novels started coming out in Japan. I started reading them. I was like, man, I'd really like to write like an RPG type story. And I started playing WoW. And the first Wild Worlds is basically my struggle of getting back into WoW. I played Burning Crusade years ago, barely. Right. Because again, there was not very good internet where I lived. So I got back into it with a buddy, and he basically was, level 100 or whatever it was during Mist and Legion. I forget the level caps then. And he had to he basically drug my character around by its throat and just power leveled me. It was like, okay, here's the mechanics. So that's where the inspiration for the overall story for the first Wild Worlds came from, was this person having to take somebody under their wing and just be, I'll just handle everything. You just watch me and try not to get killed.
And so talk to us a bit about Wild Worlds then. So there's how many books in Wild Worlds? What do you found out so far?
There's currently 3. I published 2 under Severed Press, and then I decided to try to take it under Amazon. And again, I'm completely ignorant on. There's a big difference between writing and publishing. And so now I'm going to work on getting those republished. I'm going to edit them a little bit more, added a couple of pretty pictures in there, hopefully, and hopefully republish all 3 of them and then keep the story going, because I've got plans for a lot of books in that series. So that's where they're probably delisted right now, but they're coming back eventually. Okay. Hopefully in the next couple years at least.
Okay, and talk to us a bit about Wild Worlds. Give us a bit of what the setting is like. How did you build the world? And
so the world it's actually a spacefaring universe. So again, all my inspiration was like trying to go big with as much as possible, and I took inspiration from not just World of Warcraft. I took it from Final Fantasy. I took it from even Warhammer 40,000. That's where I decided to go spacey with it. And I wanted to be able to just go into, hopefully in the future, far more insane environments. But Wild Worlds 1 takes place on a mostly on a desert planet where a lady crashes and she finds somebody there with the skills that can repair her ship. However, his part of the bargain is that he has to come with her, and she trains him and power levels him up so he can survive on his own.
Huh.
So it's a person that doesn't want to mentor anybody with somebody that is kind of enthusiastic, obnoxiously enthusiastic about what he wants. Um, and it's just that kind of their mentor student dynamic, and her trying to keep him alive as not only giant monsters, exploding rabbit monsters come in, space pirates come in, they have to deal with them, and just them trying to survive.
So talk to us a bit. I'm very curious about the genre of lit RPG.
Mm-hmm.
So how overt are you in the story to say somebody is leveling up, for instance?
So I'm very light on the stats.
Mm,
Compared to a lot more books and series out there are really dense with describing the stats and how everything meticulously is built. I kind of left mine intentionally vague to be like an entry point, not only for new readers into the genre, so they don't get overwhelmed with numbers, especially if you're not a fan initially of RPGs, because it's a lot of numbers in like D&D
mm,
and what have you. So mine's relatively light, but they do discuss how the mechanics work, how the stats work. They have speed, dexterity, strength, endurance, health, luck, intelligence, and wisdom. Um, they do discuss all those stats. Get how to get experience, uh, unlocking special powers, things like that. When you start off as basically a level 0,
right.
it once you get your class and once you pick your class, and then you have to start leveling up from there by doing a multitude of things. However, I also incorporated um, a type of leveling where working out, if you lift weights, your strength will increase naturally. One of my
Right.
favorite games growing up was Dark Heart. Was it Dark Harvest? I am no, Hybrid Heaven. I am sorry. I am blanking on everything tonight. It's been a long day for me. Hybrid Heaven, which um, it was a turn-based fighting type game, but like the more you performed a move, the better you got at it, or the more
Mm,
times your arm got damaged, the arm would level up in endurance and stuff. So I wanted something similar to that. And although people hate it, I enjoyed the leveling system of Final Fantasy 2, where that would happen. The more you get hit, your health and defense would go up. So
mm.
they incorporate some of that into these stories.
And so talk to us a bit about the world that as you made the world. You kind of
Mm-hmm.
describe what were some of your inspirations on it. But when you decide to write
Mm-hmm.
this, did you have a character arc in mind, or did you kind of like open up a big piece of paper and just start mapping out, cultures and societies and religions and currencies and stuff like that? How would you do that?
So when I started off with a simple premise of what if I had a mentor that just hated having to be a mentor, like Obi-Wan, that was like, my God, why do I have to do this? That's where the start of it was, and then I was like, okay, well, what do I need? Where do I go from here? And then I was like, I want the mentor to be like not necessarily elegant, but they're the ones that have all the top tier equipment. They've got the rare unlocked classes.
Hmm.
Um, Uriel starts off as a knight and an angel is her class, and Byron, her apprentice, is a brawler and a gadgeteer. And within the in-game stats, because they contrast so much, brawlers require a lot of heavy strength, and you don't need intelligence or wisdom for it. But
Right.
but for Gadgeteer, you need to put every extra point into intelligence and wisdom and things like that. They clash, so it's like the worst possible combination for this world. So he's having a struggle with this class combination, um, as opposed to something she's got that intentionally complements each of the strengths of her classes. Then I was like, well, I've got to build out every other type of class. So I started off with the standards, the knight, the paladin, there's priest, wizard, sorcerers, general spellcasters, gunslingers. So I was like, let's get a little weirder. I've got one where you're a wizard, but you specialize in summoning bugs
Right.
and taming bugs, almost like a Pokemon master in a way. Um, I've got ninjas in there and psychics and warlocks. Those classes haven't shown up. Not all those classes have shown up yet, but I had to build those out. When you reference currency, I was the best. Some of the best inspiration is real life. It's like, well, how many currencies are out in the world?
Right.
There's dozens at the very least. How many have been through the centuries? I actually own a piece of currency in the shape of a dolphin from Greece from like the year 30 BC or something like that. So, that's what some of my inspiration is. So there's stuff called crowns and thrones, which I think is a reference to something. There's the classic gold, silver. There's dollars. There's digital dollars. In cryptocurrency inspired stuff. It's and so you have to carry around a multitude of currency because some planets might not accept it. Then from there, I was like, well, why would they accept it? Well, now we have to build out world governments. Where do I want the hierarchy to sit at? With space travel, how am I going to justify fast and light travel? How do I want to justify that? So they travel through for cross galaxies. They go through warp tubes, basically. So things like that is how you just take a problem and you're like, well, how do we fix it in the real world, and then how do I make it a little more fantastical? As a writer, you're always trying to look for creative ways of like naming characters, making mythological references or references to real life events. But then, sometimes you got to be ridiculous where, well, this is Bridgetown because they're next to a bridge. And then you're like, nobody's ever going to think that's a real name. But then you got to realize there's an urban legend about a hill with a name that once you translate means hill, 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 hill in like the UK somewhere. It's like humans do ridiculous stuff in their naming conventions all the time. So we can do like the really detailed stuff, and then sometimes we can just be ridiculous. Yeah, this is Greentown because everything's green around it.
Right. So I'm also curious about the genre itself. Is looking at it from the perspective of video games and looking at perspective of writing a fantasy novel where you kind of follow a character's story arc where there is a level of decay or deterioration or sunsetting of a character, because you look at, as you mentioned, Obi-Wan Kenobi, for instance, as he does end up growing older and getting not as powerful. How do you balance the role-playing, the video game role-playing game where it's just exponential growth continuously? You never get to, you say, level 100 and just you're not as powerful as you are at level 50. You're just going to keep getting more and more powerful. How do you as a writer, how do you give that hero's journey or that story of that bell curve of the sense where you get to be powerful, but then it's time to move on kind of situation?
Well, you don't not every conflict has to be a battle where you could just brute force your way through. Some things are going to require subtlety. Some things will have to require you can't just take a massive let's say fireball in space to finish off a villain, or sometimes you have to think things through. Even though you have the strength to move a mountain, like if I do this, then it's going to turn the world against me. Can I beat everybody on this planet? Okay, I might be level 100 to do that, but then guess what? That's going to make everybody else in the system mad, and then more and more. So you could always do things like that. The conflict might have to become a non-violent or a creative resolution. Within the world's Bible itself, it's like there's healing items that can heal you from practically the brink of death or beyond if it's a powerful, rare enough item. However, there could be risk to that maybe somebody wasn't strong enough to survive a resurrection spell, or maybe there's a time limit on when the resurrection spell can happen, or if a individual isn't either leveled up enough to develop a type of healing factor, or they're just in the middle of the woods and they're injured by something, they're probably going to die. Or if they are able to recover, they're going to have to take the long path on healing, which will naturally degrade a person, no matter if it's Bruce Lee or Arnold Schwarzenegger or whomever. If they don't work out, if they don't exercise, they're going to lose something. And that same thing would apply into this fantasy world as well. Even so, their stats can fluctuate,
Okay.
um, because it's still their real life from their perspective.
Right. Okay. And so when you look at it from that perspective, is like how writing a genre like this, where you put in your own stats and stuff,
Mhm.
does this make it easy to translate into making your own tabletop game for Wild Worlds as well?
You know, I specifically developed Wild Worlds that it could become something else. I
Right.
wanted it to be fun and adventure enough. Like, it's a wishful thinking. Where's my magic lamp? But it would be a fun TV show, or it could even become a tabletop um, type of game. That's why I went ahead and built out 30 or 40 different classes, even though we've only seen a fraction of that in the actual books themselves. Um, I've built out dozens of planets, dozens of my Bible with characters and plots and worlds and locations. It's almost as long as the first book,
Wow.
and just because I have all this back stuff, just in case.
Right.
I like to do a lot of world building at the front end of things, and then sometimes I'll have to slide stuff in. Like, well, how would this situation work out politically based off what I've built for this planet or the solar system at large? The rulership. Then I have to think about that. Then I'm like incorporating that into the Bible itself. So yes, this could. I did intentionally make this to where it, in theory, one day it could translate into a game.
So when it comes to, as you said, you had like about 40 different character classes. From a lit RPG quote unquote game mechanic perspective, how do you balance to make sure each class is not overpowering a different class?
Well, that's the great thing is that I'm not necessarily worried about balancing the classes because at the end of the day, it's how the characters itself utilizes it.
Okay.
Um, somebody might max like the way they personally stat themselves. They may have overwhelming power, and while that might be an OP class in theory, because they've specialized in one way, they will, a brawler that can rip spaceship holes apart. That long range fighter over there. Well, guess what? He's got a missile launcher that's also magically enhanced. That's built specifically to wear out all your natural defenses or magical defenses. It's so a lot of it is based on how creative can the characters, and I guess me, how creative can the characters be when encountering something based off their past experiences in general. That's one of the things with Byron as a gadgeteer and brawler. It's like, well, those classes are not meant to be combined. They're meant to combine with a bunch of different other classes, sure. I've got one guy that's a gunslinger and a mage. So he's a spell slinger. So he uses magically enchanted bullets. So while he can fire them off really quickly and he doesn't necessarily use his own personal mana, it's harder for him to cast a normal spell if he runs out of bullets.
Right.
Things like that. I have one guy. He has magic tattoos all over him that he can activate to boost his powers. And he's also got a really powerful weapon, but his main class is transforming into a monster. Well, if he transforms, he can't really use that hand item anymore. And if he doesn't activate his tattoos first, they go away. He can't use that boost. So it's all about incorporating that. Circling back to Byron, he's got to figure out how to incorporate tech into his punches and things. So maybe making bigger gauntlets, robotic gauntlets, maybe with weaponry. And a lot of his stuff, spoiler alert, a lot of his stuff later on is going to be more Bugs Bunnying ways, like
Right.
setting up traps ahead of time or releasing traps on the fly.
And so I'm curious because you mentioned some inspiration from World of Warcraft, some
Mhm,
inspiration from Final Fantasy II, as you mentioned.
mhm.
What parts of your novel that you came up that as you're writing this that were just uniquely yours that you said, oh, I wish a video game or I wish a role playing game would do this thing that I just came up with?
Um, oh geez. Well, one of my things is, and I guess again, there's probably games out there that do it, and I guess technically WoW does it, but like you know, I do like it when that you finally reach that plateau and you're as powerful as you can be. Some games don't let you go and backtrack. A
Mm,
new game plus of sorts. I do like it when
right.
games do that. Again, tons of games already do that. Chrono Trigger, for one, that might be the
Right.
best example. I think Earthbound has a new game plus, et cetera, et cetera. Um, what? Geez, I don't know. I've really, I the biggest thing I could say is I wish that an MMO was kind of like this, where it wasn't centralized to one like relatively small location. Like WoW
Right.
is mainly Azeroth, a couple of dimension hops, of course, but they don't really incorporate the spacefaring, or they try to make this story where you're just kind of on the side. You know,
Okay.
this feels more like I built Wild Worlds to be like that. You could imagine yourself in in this universe with a character that you built, and that you're not stepping on any other character's toes. You can make your own completely unique planet, um, that you could base adventures around. That fan writers could write their own fiction about. Running into these characters, things like that. It's just like a lot of games, especially MMOs. You feel like you're on a roller coaster, but you can't deviate either way.
Right.
You're for the Horde no matter what. You're back in Sylvanas or whoever's the current Horde war chief, or you're back in the Alliance and all their dumb moves, and they keep calling you General this and General that. It's like, but you're still sending me out to kill rats, man. It's like, so I want this. I want this to feel like anybody could jump in and make it their own in a way. That, hey, I'm going to make a this type of combo class, and I'm going to make this kind of planet within the Wild Worlds realm, and it would
Right.
be totally justifiable. As long as you don't break any of my current canon, where you go and kill my main characters. Don't do that. That'd be mean.
Right.
Hurt my
Well, it's
feelings.
kind of like the examples between, as they say, the difference between an amusement park or a sandbox. Like an
Mm-hmm.
amusement park is you pretty much have to follow the lines. There's not a lot to do, or like Skyrim, which is like sandbox where you can pretty
Mm-hmm.
much do whatever you want. So, um, interesting. So you have 3 books out of Wild World so far. You said correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so let's talk a bit about. So talk to us. How did you meet that get involved with ASAP Imagination?
So I'm on Twitter, right? Like everybody else is. And I think I somehow misfriended or started following Miss L.A. Cunningham. I don't know if
Hmm.
you've talked to her yet or not. Um, Wonderful, wonderful person. And she just mentions, hey, there's this. They're working on this charity anthology. I was like, well, I've done that one time. Let me see if I can do another one. And I was like, because I really had this idea. Well, I actually had written the story already, and I couldn't figure out what to do with it because it was too short of a
Hmm.
concept to flesh out to something bigger, and it was relatively too short for just about anybody else to use. But for an anthology, it would be perfect. And she just
Right.
happened to mention that there was an anthology being made, and I was like, "Cool, let me submit this and see what happens." And they picked it up, and it's like the first. Like one of my friends had to point this out to me. This is how oblivious I am sometimes. She's like, "Hey, you're the first story in there." I'm like, they are putting a lot of pressure on me and my story to be the first one because people are going to pick this up and be like, "Oh, no."
And that was The Hunted, correct?
Yeah, I went through. I'm not very good with titles, unfortunately. So I had to go through a lot. Then finally, I just asked them once they picked it up. I was like, "Here's a couple of suggestions. Just whatever you think is going to be best, roll with it." And they like the hunted. So
Right. So talk to us about that, like through the anthology of
mhm.
perspectives, and is there a theme, a running theme that goes through the anthology?
So like the title says, it's all about perspectives on seeing things from different viewpoints through different genres, through different types of
Hmm.
characters. Um, and there's tons of different genres. Mine's mainly a horror one. There's some sci-fi ones in there, I believe, and a few others. But it's mainly that seeing things through others' eyes, or seeing their world, or seeing our world itself through a different type of perspective.
Hmm. So what was so this is you wrote this as a horror thing, but you've never really done horror before, correct?
I don't. Yeah, I've never really done horror. Horror is, anybody could write like a nice explosion scene, right? Everybody could be like, "Oh, well, that was pretty cool." But horror is one of those really fine lines of a genre. It's so tricky to make a good
Hmm.
horror story. I mean, you see it in movies all the time where it's like, "Well, I didn't find that scary," while somebody else is like, "Well, I'm in my third pair of underwear because that was the scariest thing I've ever seen." And so I was really intimidated by this genre, but I had this story idea, and I was like, well, let me try it.
Right.
If I don't like it, I can always delete it, and nobody will be the wiser.
So how did that work? Did you already have this story in mind, and then this opportunity to submit it to the anthology, or did you write this specifically for the anthology?
I actually wrote it ahead of time.
Okay.
And, it was just one of those ideas to kick around. And then I have several very talented writer friends, and they just read it for me for a laugh, and they enjoyed it.
Hmm.
And so that boosted my confidence a little bit to submit to ASAP and anyone worlds, um, and try my hand there because they have a bunch of talented writers following them and that they work with. And I was like, oh, let me see if I could keep up with these guys.
Right. So talk to us a bit for those that listen. We have a lot of writers that listen to the podcast and stuff, and things that are writers that are looking to get published. Um, what would be your advice to those potential writers and authors to the benefits of going in with an anthology or writing your first book and then self-publishing it, for instance?
So one of the biggest things I see is people concerned about word counts, and
Hmm.
if your story is good, publishers are about to say, "Hey, we want an 80,000 word story." If you're at 75,000 or 70,000, and they're like, "This story is amazing," they're going to take it. So don't stress about word counts that much. First off,
Hmm.
um, there's exceptions to every rule. I'll say that. Um, you know, with something like an anthology, that's a great way of getting your feet wet because it's a 5,000 words. It's a few pages on
Right.
average. That's a great way to stretch some of your creative legs. You know, you can submit, and then guess what? That will get your foot in the door to meet not only a potential publisher or two, but other writers. And the writing
Okay.
community is such it's so good to have other writers to give you ideas. Obviously, not to steal anything, but like to help inspire you or for brainstorming sessions. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go to my other writers and be like, "How does this work? Or how do I make this work? Or what does this sound like?" Now, for beta reading, it's always good to get somebody that doesn't write to potentially do a beta read for you. But you know, having a community around you in general, even if you don't get published, if they're like in a group and you guys critique each other's work, that would just help make you get better. Um, However, I'm sorry, I want to have a couple of bits of advice, so I'm sorry if I ramble. One of the
No,
other
good.
biggest things is don't take anything too personal. If any kind of criticism or rejections, don't take that personal. I had when I submitted to for Heart of a Child, that author's tale one.
Right.
I had several authors or several writers arguing over a single line of dialogue whether to keep it in or not, and I decided to keep it in because I was like, well, whatever. Um, because no two opinions are going to be exactly the same. Some people might think
Hmm.
the idea is brilliant. Some people might think it's awful. You know, do whatever's best for the story itself. If you think it's
Right.
best for the story, leave it in there or take it out. At the end of the day, the story being as strong as it can be is what matters.
Right. So you've done a couple anthologies,
Hmm.
and as you mentioned before that you talk about writers groups.
Hmm.
Um, you know, for a writer, what might be asking the question: how do I find a good writers group, and how do I know it's a good writers group?
Um, Really, like if it's online, usually their posts, you might not be able to comment or anything, but you should be able to see their posts and just see how the personalities are, how people are talking to each other. Just observe like that. If you meet a couple of decent writers, they say never meet your heroes, but I've talked to some writers that I absolutely idolize their work, and they've
Yeah.
actually read my stuff. And when they messaged me, I was like, "Holy crap! Why are you wasting your time reading my stuff? You were writing like absolute masterpieces out there." Um, you know, you never know who you're going to stumble on, and don't be afraid just because you have one bad experience. Don't let that hinder you on doing
Hmm.
anything else. I've just been really lucky in my quote unquote writing career that almost everybody I've met have been absolutely fantastic. ASAP, Mr. Hayden, Mrs. Cunningham, um, my friends over at AT, all of them have been absolutely fantastic.
Right. So, what advice would you give a writer who says, Mitch, I've been saving up money. I got $500 to help me get my first book published. What would your advice be to what would you spend that $500 on?
An editor, find an editor.
Hmm.
Do not go vanity publishing. That publishers should be paying you. Either they'll pay you up front an X amount of money if you're really lucky and you get a literary agent, or they will give you a contract that says we're going to pay you a certain amount of royalties to publish your book. Don't go with vanity publishing. That's a hollow victory. That's like going to the trophy store and just buying yourself the biggest trophy and so the world's greatest person ever. Don't do that. Save up your money. Either pay for a good, just pay for a good editor. Depending on the publishing company you go with, they will probably have an artist to do cover work. If you're a professional editor on your own, or you got a friend that'll do it to you, which I've had some great friends do my editing for me in the past for free. Maybe some artwork, maybe a little bit of artwork, but editing will make or break a good story. You can have the best story in the world, but if nobody can read it and understand it, nobody's going to pick it up.
Right. So you're saying like absolutely that. How would you rank an editor in that? It's like, is that, as you say, that's going to be a writer's best friend is a good editor.
A good editor, somebody that's going to check for continuity for your, hey, listen, you said this in this one section. Now you're saying this opposite thing here. Why are you doing that? Not just checking your grammar, but checking that the story makes sense within itself and that you're keeping to the rules you establish. Remember, nobody cares if your character can bench press 100 tons and shoot heat vision, but don't keep giving it powers as they go. Or, if you say he can only lift 50 pounds and all of a sudden he's carrying around, ship barge is full of oil. Like, well, where, or you say, I'm never going to kill. And then the very next sentence, he pulls out a gun and kills somebody. Like, those things are very important. You have to stay true to the rules that you establish.
Right.
So you need an editor that's going to look for that kind of stuff. And again, but even editors can fall to their own opinion. So you have the final say in there. And you can say, well, no, I want that line in there because of reasons, or I want it worded specifically this way. So even when you use stuff like Hemingway or Grammarly, they're looking at it at a strictly mathematical formula type of way of editing. They're not looking at the heart or soul of that sentence. So while your sentence may not be grammatically correct, the spirit of it is correct.
You mentioned Hemingway. Is that kind of like Grammarly? What is Hemingway?
Yeah, it's just another editing app where it shows you like the strengths and weaknesses of your sentences, what your overall reading, I guess your reading or writing level is at. Like, hey, this would work at a college grade level, or like this is a greater level of writing. Not necessarily saying that your writing is that badly, but the way you're wording things is what the age range of your story is.
And where would you recommend for someone to find an editor? As you said, if it's not a vanity press, where could a writer find an editor?
I mean, I can plug my friend if if you want, because I think she's great. Other than that, you just need to. A lot of good editors are going to have reviews. You could search their names. Various websites. Again, the writing communities, you might say, hey, listen, I could swear by this editor, or this one never got back to me after the first draft, or they tried to take my money or run. Ask around. Word of mouth is so strong on every level. Restaurants live and breathe by it. Movies live and breathe by it. And the same goes for a good editor. And don't, again, and one last little piece of advice is don't think, and this is kind of mean to say for all of us, but don't think that your story is so good that somebody's going to try to steal it, because the moment you put it down on paper, it's, and you've got timestamps to that document, it's it's got a naturalized copyright to it of sorts, so it's
Mm.
legally yours. You can't copyright an idea, but once you got that written down on paper, then you've got more legal footing. So don't be afraid to hand your story out a little bit. Well,
Yeah.
they say all the stories have been written,
Right.
but every story's been told. However, you haven't told it, so who cares if you're telling a Superman story again? We want to hear it from you.
Right.
All of my stories are. I love adventure stories. You probably read them 1,000 times, but you haven't read mine yet. I'm not saying mine's the best out there. I'm not saying mine's the worst, but it's from my perspective. I always write what I want to read, and anybody else that enjoys it is just a bonus for me.
Mm. That's a good point. And you said that in a previous interview too. Write the kind of books that you want to read. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, comparing to your very first book, The Untold Tales of Exodia.
Oh, that name hurts me. You can just say the first book. Well, just as a writer and artist, you're always dreading the previous works, I guess. But that was like kid me.
Well, I guess my question is, what would you tell the kid you? What advice would you give the kid you to that you wish somebody told you after writing your fifth book?
What would? Oh, that's a good one. What would research more. Research more. Remember, this was 2004, so the internet was still a young and wild place, so it was hard to find stuff. Again, as a stupid kid, but research more. Try to figure out the rules of the publishing world. Reach out. Hey, you should probably start this book I made up 10 years later called Wild World. Start writing that now. Get your foot in the door before this genre becomes super big.
So ultimately though, do you feel it was important for you to write your first book in order to get moving?
I think so. Again, I didn't really pick up a pencil to write again for years afterwards.
Right.
However, I felt like it was just I hate sounding so pretentious and stuff, but it's like, as an artist or a writer, it feels like you have to do this thing.
Right.
You have to get this story out. You develop these characters, and they want to see the world, and they want the world to see them. And that's how I feel. Like if I go too far with a story idea, it's like these characters now exist. I have to get them out there. And again, I hate wording it so artsy fartsy like that, but that's how I feel a lot of times. Where like, hey man, this would be a cool idea for a character. Well, now she exists or he exists. Okay, well here's a cool scene I want to write them in. Oh well, now that scene has developed some more of their personality. Now I've got to do more for them. I'm juggling 3 manuscripts right now.
Wow.
Because of that, because I'm like, well, this would be a cool scene, or this would be a cool character, and and that's what happened with my next book coming out too. Man, it was just an idea that got out of control.
Right, and so, but you self-published the Wild Worlds, correct?
The first 2 I went through a publisher called Severed Press. The third one I self-published, and now I'm going to work with Any One World, hopefully to bring it back in the near future. After I get a few more things done, unfortunately, I've had to put them on the back burner. But I'm going
so
to
you would take.
Okay,
so you're going to circle back to ASAP Imaginations with your Wild Worlds, your entire series, then?
Yes, sir. So I'm going to try to. We'll work out the details, but they've shown an interest in doing it. So,
okay.
And fortunately, I don't have to edit or anything. They've all been fully edited. I just want to include some extra stuff now that I've developed the worlds even further.
Right. And so you said, you mentioned earlier that you have a lot of stories to tell on this point. Do you have an ultimate story arc that you want to follow with the character, or you just love the world itself and you just want to tell as many stories as possible?
So with the first 3 books I put out, so the first 2 books follow 2 main characters, Uriel and Byron. The third one switches gears and follows an entire new cast.
Wow. Okay.
And then the 4th book will be actually going back to Uriel Byron, and then the 5th book will bring all those casts together.
Oh, wow.
But one of my biggest things, and that goes back to my man, I wish there was a big sandbox MMO out there, is that I want to, and that's why I purposely named it Wild Worlds as opposed to the Adventures of Uriel and Byron. Is I want it to be like at any point I could just write a book, and be like, hey, here's a whole new planet with a whole new cast that I could just throw in there.
Right.
But Uriel and Byron are still doing their own things, and everyone else is doing their own things. But here's just another story in this universe, just to help show that it's big and that you can be here too if you want to be.
Oh, that's awesome. So I'm so curious. So Mitch, if people want to learn more about you as an author or follow your work, what would be the best place that they could go to?
Right now, Twitter, I don't really post that much about my writing because I'm in the middle stages of, I've got a new book coming out with Any One World. Wild Worlds is unfortunately currently on the back burner. I'm in the middle of book 4, but then these other ideas came up, so you can follow me on my Twitter at Mr. Beardsley. I share a lot of I like to retweet and share a lot of other writers and artist stuff because I want everybody to succeed. There's people will reference like there's a pie. There's no such thing as a pie. There's not a limited audience out there. If you write what they want, they will get you. It doesn't matter, especially readers. It doesn't matter if they've got 50 other books. They're going to put yours in that to be read pile too. So I want everybody to succeed. I want everybody to make $1 billion off their writing or their art or whatever. So you can see me retweet stuff on Twitter. That's mainly where I'm mostly active. And
they can check out your stuff as well. As we say, it's like you have most of your books already that you can get it through Amazon. And if they're interested in looking at perspectives, which, as you say, is you're the first story in that book, they could go to ne1world.com and the book is available right there.
Yep, you can grab a digital copy, and remember that these perspectives is for charity. So if you had a choice between buying like my Wild Worlds book on audio or whatever, or perspectives, please buy perspectives because again, it's for charity, and they need the money more than I do. Obviously, I want the readers, and I do want sales, but I would much rather help a charity out, than me being more successful or whatever. But then just say that my book's the best one in that. Just 5 stars just because of Mitch's story.
That's right. I
will accept that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Mitch. This has been great. And you got to come back on when you get when your next book is coming out.
Absolutely. I'm in the finishing touches with my editor right now, my amazing editor. Hi, Crystal, if you watch this. But yeah, it's actually a horror one that started off as a short story that expanded into a full novel. So wow. You get to pick apart my horror knowledge now, like stressing me on all these. I didn't study for this my video game lore, unfortunately, for this thing. You got me, but I'll get you next time.
Yeah, okay. Good. All right, well, thanks a lot, Mitch.
Thank you, man. Anytime. It was an absolute blast.
Right. Now, what about hang on, I got so enthralled with your answer that I forgot my next question. I was all ready for it too. This is the best part, Mitch. I can just edit this part out. So it'll be smooth as butter here.